It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting through my website, emailrevealer.com, or at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. If you like our shows, our archives are always free. And our guest today, which we're lucky to get, by the way, Lisa Pease doesn't do a lot of interviews out there. Okay, we're very lucky to get her. Okay, I tried to get her for years before she gave in to my nagging. She went to get a restraining order. I turned her down. She had to come on the show. Lisa Pease, the author of A Lie Too Big to Fail, The Real History of the Assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. She's considered, by the way, the ultimate authority on the JFK assassination, or the RFK assassination, if you don't know. Look up Lisa Pease's work on Amazon, several books. Lisa Pease, are you there?
I am. Thanks for that introduction, Ed. That's fantastic.
No, I've been trying to get you for years, man. I was so lucky to get you last time, and I enjoyed our last interview so much. It's up on Spreaker.com. You could find them with Lisa Pease, Opperman, Spreaker. Remind the audience, tell them who you are. Who is Lisa Pease?
Okay, so I am a nobody. I'm just one of these people with a fascination for originally the assassinations of the 60s, but my interest quickly deepened into this whole thread of covert history that I never heard anything about in school. I didn't know the Lusitania, when it was sunk, was probably a spy ship. I didn't know that we brought Nazis over after World War II to work in U.S. intelligence. There's so much history that's been lost, and so my purpose in life appears to be to try and surface pieces of that. And some of it's not that covert, but it all ties together, and so I'll talk about things hidden and things you may have known and forgotten that are actually really important to why we're kind of in such a mess right now and how we got here. So I wanted to start back at World War II. That's when the CIA was formed after the World War II. But, obviously the U.S. had fought Germany and Japan and Italy, the Axis and the Allied powers included Russia. Russia was our ally, then the Soviet Union, the USSR. But almost immediately after World War II, there was great pressure to break with Russia, to break with the Soviet Union, and see them as the greater enemy. And this was led largely by the Dulles brothers, who truly, if there were ever two people who embodied the establishment in America, it was really Allen Dulles and his brother John Foster Dulles. They were lawyers to the Rockefellers, and their point of view was widely shared in the elite circles of the moneyed rich at the time. And so after we defeated the Nazis, it's like we've got this huge war engine, the economy is booming. How do we keep it going without a war? And so they came up with this idea of kind of a permanent war against the Soviet Union. And it worked in the sense that it kept the coffers, going, and it fed the military budgets, and all the arms investors were still making, money hand over fist. And also the Cold War then became an excuse to go get resources. And let me just back up. The Cold War was the war ostensibly, and this is the fig leaf, I believe, because I don't think this is the real reason at all, but the fig leaf was, okay, the Soviet Union is this big dominant power, and now U.S. is a world leader, and the two of them are inevitably going to have a hot war if we can't kind of curb them in these fringe areas. So the Iron Curtain was sweeping Europe. Communism was on the rise. Socialism was on the rise. And so the argument in the American elite was we have to stop communism. It's against God. It's against nature. And that's even a greater threat than the Nazis. It's a greater threat than fascism was the line at the time. And, with all due apologies to all the people whose fathers and, mothers died in World War II fighting the Nazis, Allen Dulles was helping the Nazis. He and John Foster Dulles were cutting backroom deals with them, even as we're fighting them. It's just astonishing and terrible what they were able to get away with. Reinhard Gehlen, who was like Hitler's right-hand man, ran the spy service. And so after the end of World War II, Alan's like, let's get him over here to America. He's a smart guy. He's got deep contacts. He's got spies inside the Soviet Union. We can use him. Well, what's to say that Rainer Galen, who's a very smart guy, wasn't actually using Alan Dulles instead? I mean, that's the folly, is that every smart person thinks they can use the next person, and sometimes they are played in that way and being used in return. So we won World War II, but there was this instant turn, this pivot, to make Russia, again, our previous ally, suddenly the big enemy that we have to defeat. And so to that end, the United States, through this thing called Operation Paperclip, brought scientists over, to be a part of our government, our elite, our establishment. Now, to be fair, Russia was doing the same thing. They were grabbing, fascist scientists too. I mean, it's not like we were the only ones doing this. But there was also this huge resource grab. There was a group, and Miles Copeland talks about this in some of the books he's written. Miles Copeland was one of the founding fathers of the CIA, one of the early guys, and he wrote a lot about gaming and the kind of games the CIA would play. And they'd sit around and say, okay, what's the future? Clearly airplanes. All right, what do airplanes need? Well, they need this kind of circuitry, and they need this, and they need that, and they need oil, and it's like, okay, where do we get those things? Well, the oil mostly from the Middle East, but the circuitry and the components, a lot of that came from rare earth minerals. So that meant China, that meant Africa. Those were the two places where a key component that's in computer chips, cell phones, and airplanes comes out of Africa and China. And China was a locked, closed society, and that's really, I think, what we worry about with communism, is that it's kind of a closed market to us. It's highly taxed, highly regulated. We promote capitalism as this free market thing. Of course, it's not really free. It's only free to those who have a lot of capital. Labor isn't free to just fly around the world and take a job in another country the next day after they get fired. Capital can be transferred instantly to anywhere in the world. So capital always has the advantage, which is, to me, one of the great failings of capitalism. It doesn't balance correctly with labor. I feel like there's money, there's resources, and then there's labor, and it's like a triangle. And if it gets out of balance and one side gets way too big, the others are getting short shrift. And so that's always been my particular concern with the way we do it. It isn't to say capitalism can't work, but it has to be kinder to labor. And that was the other thing that happened during World War II. The labor unions got really strong. Well, once the war is over, what's one of the first things that the CIA, the newly formed CIA, does? It infiltrates the labor unions and tries to co-opt them because, again, the CIA kind of serves the financial establishment. And so by infiltrating labor unions, they can subvert them, they can make them look like criminals, they can turn the public against them, and then suddenly, next thing you know, we have all these right-to-work laws, and, that are undermining all the gains that it took people decades to fight to obtain. We owe our 5-day work week to the unions and protesters, and because before that it was a 7-day work week. And, we're still working way more hours than most places on the planet. And, quality of life here is not what it is in France, for example, where the people are very comfortable going out and protesting all the time. But anyway, so that kind of sets the stage. So we have this new enemy, and we have this resource need, and we know the Soviets need the same things. And so suddenly we're both at war in the Congo. It's like, what does the U.S. need? Why are we intervening in the Congo? Why is Russia? Why are Russian tanks in the Congo? And it's all about those rare earth minerals. So every part of the Cold War was really like, every skirmish, if you will, was really about key resources in that area. And this continues, to this day. I mean, there's still talk, about our government wants to do more in Syria. Why is Syria so key? Well, Syria sits between Russia and the Soviet and the Saudi Arabian area, And either the West is going to pipe its gas, its natural gas, which is kind of the fuel of the future, through to Europe, or the Soviets are going to pipe their gas through Syria to Europe. So it's a big deal who controls Syria, because they control the entire European energy market. And that's why there's all these skirmishes in Syria that are going on. And all right, so why is the public so in the dark about what's really going on? Well, early on, as the CIA was forming, the intellectuals, were like, we can't tell the public everything we're doing, because honestly, if they knew, they wouldn't support us. They don't want us going and killing innocent people in Congo to steal minerals. I mean, which is basically what we did. But they don't want to hear it like that. So, they need to have this whole propaganda mechanism. And they infiltrated the media, which to me was probably the beginning of the death of America as it was meant to be. And because, again, if the media can be controlled by these people behind the scenes, we only hear the stories they want us to hear. We only hear the spin that they want us to hear. And so that was undermining American democracy, because democracy is founded on our ability to make informed decisions based on really good, solid information. And so if you take...
Let me interrupt 1 second, because people need to realize also it's not just the news media and documentaries and 60 Minutes and those kind of shows. We've done research. I've had guests on the show talk about cupcake wars. American Idol receive funding from the Department of Defense. They go to the Department of Defense for permission to use all kinds of control and influence in every TV show.
Yes, it's a culture war.
Yes.
And American Idol really turned America nasty and rude in a way it had never been before. I mean, the things that were said on that show, I think at first people tuned in because it was kind of shocking. And, I couldn't stand the show because I just thought they were so mean to these poor performers who are, putting their heart and soul into what they do and then get ripped to shreds by Simon Cowell. I thought that was a terrible, terrible show, and yet, that's so interesting then to hear, because I did not know that about the funding. I do know that Hollywood and the Pentagon have been working together for decades, because what happens? Hollywood wants to make a big war movie, and they need actual battleships and warplanes and stuff, and where are they going to get them? They're going to get them from the Pentagon. So the Pentagon says, okay, we'll give you what you want, but let me see the script first. Let's make sure it's a positive, depiction of Americans in action, rah, rah, go America. And can you put this little piece in it, because we really want to get out this message? For example, Top Gun ended up being a high recruitment tool for the Air Force. And it was kind of done somewhat deliberately with that in mind. There's a great book called Operation Hollywood that has just dozens of stories of films that you saw and liked, but didn't realize what the government was doing with those films. So you're right. It's not just the news media. It's our entire culture. Now, we were waging this same culture war in Europe, too. There was actually something called the Cultural Congress. I'm missing the Committee for Culture or something. I forget what the name of it is, but there have been a few books about this, too, and how the CIA funded erudite literary magazines discussing poetry. It's like, why? And then you understand when you realize that Bob Dylan wrote a song about the JFK assassination that was suppressed until literally this year. He finally got it released while we were all in the COVID lockdown. And it's like, because even poetry can be meaningful and can promote a political idea. And so, and then there's another component also that we haven't talked about, and that's the whole academia. All right, in college, certain topics, again, it's like if you wanted to study the Kennedy assassination 10 years ago in college, no one would allow you to. It's like, well, I'm not going to sign off on that paper. That's some crazy conspiracy theory thing. And nowadays, because enough time has passed, and it's, the people who were the most concerned are all dead, the actual conspirators are dead for the most part, there's less, I think, less sitting on that. But it's still 9/11. Can you imagine doing your master's thesis on what really happened at 9/11? I bet there aren't a lot of schools that would allow you to do that yet. And again, maybe 50 years from now, that will be a common topic. But there's this hidden hand in American society controlling what we think, what we see, what we interact with, the radio, music. There's been books written about the music industry and how music is used as a form of mind control. And this loops me back to bringing the Nazis over, because one of the big things we wanted from the Nazis was their amazing ability to propagandize the masses, and also the results of their horrific mind control experiments. And then our country, our scientists participated in some horrible ones. I saw there was a documentary called Three Unusual Strangers. I forget what the exact name was, but it was about these triplets separated at birth, all adopted by different families. And at first, it's very happy, and they reunite, and they're so thrilled to find each other because they were identical triplets. And not only do they look alike, they think alike, they act alike. And then they find out, you learn in the course of this documentary, they were part of a secret experiment held right here in America. And this is what I call Nazi science. It's like there was no regard to how this would affect the children. They wanted to know if you separated three identical kids and gave them to rich family, poor family, middle income family, how would they develop, and what's the difference between nature and nurture? So they treat them like lab rats.
Because if it's the three men I'm thinking of, they were sort of like husky kind of Italian guys, beefy muscle guys with curly. Okay. Yes. Because they made when they found each other originally, they made all the talk. They were on Mike Douglas. They were on all the talk shows, afternoon talk shows. They were big cause celebrity. These three guys. When did they find out?
Had together. Yeah.
When did they find out it was an experiment?
After all that hoopla.
Really?
Because they started tracing back, what had happened. It was really the documentary filmmakers, trying to find out what had happened, and they kind of stumbled upon the experiment by accident. I mean, no one suspected that was in their background. And one of the brothers was so depressed by this that he actually committed suicide. I mean, it's just horrific.
Oh, that's horrible.
Maybe he had mental problems all along, but this definitely put him over the edge. And so you can't treat people as non-human. You can't treat them as lab rats in experiments. And to me, the racism we're seeing right now, today, in the streets with cops just casually kneeling on a guy until they strangle him to death. I mean, the casualness of it is so upsetting to me, because it means that cop is not seeing a human being. He's not seeing anybody that he considers of any potential value, just somebody that he thinks is worth extinguishing. This is a mindset. There really is a mindset. And the reason it's getting a lot of play now that it never used to, the reason I think more people are more overt about feeling that way, I attribute largely to the taking down of the fairness doctrine during Reagan's administration, because Reagan ruled during a very critical period. It was really the end of the Cold War. And so, after World War II, we still had this big enemy, Russia. And, and then the Cold War kind of came to a screeching halt when Gorbachev took over and had glasnost and openness, and suddenly the Berlin Wall is coming down. And it was like, oh my God, where's our next enemy? is what the people in the government are thinking. And so without an enemy to use all their spy technology on, guess what they start spying on? Us, the United States people. And I swear, it's as if there was a plot, because there's kind of a, you can kind of follow the steps. It's as if somebody said, let's just completely take over America. We could make fascism right here. Now, I doubt anybody used those words or was that explicit. But it's been happening piece by piece. And dismantling the fairness doctrine was key. What was the fairness doctrine? There used to be a rule that if you put something on the news airwaves, that you had to give equal time to an opposing point of view. And so the news was very careful to be as nonpartisan, as unbiased as possible, because they didn't want to give up any of their airtime to anyone. And the times where they went over and they stepped over the line, they did have to give up time. In fact, one of the times was when NBC attacked New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison when he was prosecuting Clay Shaw for involvement in a conspiracy to kill President Kennedy. And the NBC did this hour-long special that basically attacked Garrison's character mercilessly and falsely. And so Garrison fought back. You know, he's a lawyer, he's a DA. And so he challenged the network, and he's like, you got to give me equal time to respond. And they ended up giving him a half hour. You know, I'm sure they could argue that, you know, some parts of what they said were factual, but they gave him a half hour to respond, and his response is probably available on YouTube, and if not, it's in somebody's documentary. I forget which one. There aren't a lot of good documentaries on Garrison, but it's out there. Anyway, he had the ability to fight back because we had this fairness doctrine. Fox News could not exist with the fairness doctrine because every 5 minutes they'd have to switch and give the other point of view. You know what I mean? And I think we need to bring this back because what we have now is we have these, it's really a divide and conquer strategy. I mean, if Putin had organized this, he couldn't have done a better job to destroy America than to take away the fairness doctrine, because suddenly now the right wing hears only its own propaganda and hears nothing of the left. The left watches MSNBC and hears nothing from the right. And CNN, you know, is kind of what used to be centrist in the sense that they try to be, I think, a little more fair, a little less biased, but they're pretty much on the MSNBC side too. And so we have these extremely polarized, I don't call them news shows. I don't think they should be allowed to use the word news, because really what they are is they're politics. They're all politics all the time, and they're really propaganda channels for their owners' views of politics.
Do you know who came up with that plan for MSNBC to take that, I guess, Democrat slant? It was Dan Abrams. The same guy who,
how funny.
Yeah, I know, the same guy who put out the live PD thing, you know, and which I also think was some kind of a brainwashing operation. The
live PD thing. What are you talking about?
Well, I think it was like to desensitize us from police rudeness and manipulating and just making us more agreeable to being stopped and frisked and searched and having our private things waved up at the camera, you know, sex toys and stuff as they're searching our cars and humiliated in public by these cops. Have you ever watched it?
Oh, no, I haven't watched. I had no idea that's what was on it. Oh, my God. That's terrible.
It was just taken off the air because of all the protests and stuff like that. And one of the reasons they took it off, too, was because they filmed a black man being killed by police in custody, and the police closed the case, and they destroyed the film. The film has never been aired.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Oh, that's terrible. Yeah, it's just heartbreaking to see, again, man's inhumanity to man. And it can only happen. Brainwashing is the right term, but it happens early. I mean, it happens from childbirth. And, you know, I know when I was growing up, we used to go eat at Little Black Sambo's and get pancakes, and there'd be this little black slave character on the walls. And it was like, you know, as a kid, I didn't think about it, you know, but as an adult, it's kind of horrifying. And, you know, of course, you know, political correctness caught up with them, and they're no longer in business. And, you know, what a horrible image. And so there's kind of these racist depictions that are subtle and we don't always process. Well, it's not so subtle, you know, if you have a little slave boy running around on the walls, but you know, it was just something accepted. No one talked about it. No one said, "Hey, that's a slave. Why is he on the wall? Why are you doing that?" It was just part of the culture, and so we all have this programming, some to a much greater degree than others, because I was never raised to hate any race or whatever, but other people were. And when I got to college, that was like the first time I ran into people who were real racists. And I was so shocked. It's like, how could this possibly exist in the world that I live in? It seems so weird. But it happens early and often, and parents do some of the programming. Television does some of the programming. The news does the programming. Here's a white guy who makes a lot of money. Here's a black guy who robbed a store. It's like this subtle juxtaposition. They don't show the white guy robbing the store or the black guy making a lot of money. They don't frame it that way. And
remember, because you talk about stuff when we were kids, the Frito Bandito.
Oh yeah. I love the Frito Bandito.
I know.
I love Fritos. And I'll be your friend, the Frito Bandito.
Spanish guy's a bandito. Lisa Pease.
Oh my God! Yeah, these terribly racist stereotypes, and even the cartoons we watched. There was stuff like that, and blackface in the films. I mean. Now, there was a recent kerfuffle with Gone with the Wind, Apple pulling Gone with the Wind because they feel it was like a false depiction of history. I'm like, it's fiction! Of course it's a false depiction of history. No one thought Gone with the Wind was a documentary. What? I mean, people need to understand, if you see something in a film, it's probably not true. And even when they say it's based on a true story, now that I'm like working a little bit in the film industry and getting to know people and reading scripts, like most of the stuff based on a true story is very little of that is actually true. Because you have to to make a good film, you need a lot of action in a 2-hour sequence. You can't tell real life because most people's real life doesn't have a 2-hour slice that's that exciting of it. You know what I mean? So everything's fictionalized if it's, even in documentaries now, and even in nonfiction books. This is the part that really gets me, because this is something else. Again, when we talk about the CIA and the media, the CIA went into the publishing houses too. They made contracts with people. They review books, that talk about the CIA before they ever come out. When I was first working on my RFK book, I got one of the top agents in the country, and he shopped it around to a bunch of the major publishers, and no one would touch it because it went after the CIA for their involvement in killing Robert Kennedy. And, so it's like I, put that fantasy aside pretty quickly. It's like, okay, I have to tell the truth on my terms because, no major publisher is ever going to do this. And in a way, that was a good thing because I wrote a much better book doing it on my own, and I didn't go to a publisher until I was finished, or almost finished. I contacted Adam at Feral House because I'd worked with him before and said, I'm ready now. But people have no idea that a lot of the books that are so-called nonfiction, especially big popular history, are actually full of people invent stuff. They make up conversations that never happen. They make up characters that never happen. There's a friend of mine, a lawyer, who's literally putting together this huge website that just takes apart books and authors who have done this kind of factual pollution of history, where they've inserted fiction into ostensibly nonfiction books, which then become movies. I mean, that's it gets the effect gets amplified.
Yeah, there's always a movie that tells the official story. That's the end of the story. This is the effect that everybody remembers. Now, Lisa Pease, a couple of quick personal questions. Have you ever considered a college professor, being a professor and teaching these to students and molding their lives and directing an army of Lisa Pease juniors?
I definitely fantasized about that. I feel like I'm a little on the old side to be going that route. Unfortunately, if I had thought of that 10 years ago, that probably would have been a great place for me. And again, 10 years ago, though, I feel like academia was so controlled. Right. When I was first on the internet, one of the groups I landed in was Alt Conspiracy JFK, a news group discussing the assassination of President Kennedy instead of Robert Kennedy. And it was controlled. This news group was controlled by a Harvard-trained assistant professor out of Marquette University. And he was so mean and so nasty. And then I suddenly realized this is what happens in academia. All it takes is one nasty person to put you down, and most people fold. Very few people have the moral strength of character to stand up to a bully. When people are bullied, they fold up and they go away. And, ironically, people think that's going to work on Trump. Like, well, if we just bully him, he'll fold up and go away. It's like, no, he's a psychopath. He loves the attention. Are you kidding? The more you attack him, the happier he gets,
Now, you mentioned also, too, that you're working with the media, so maybe a film made out of your book?
Well, there were some documentary people. I believe they're still working on it. Honestly, I haven't heard a peep out of them, and I don't know if that's because of COVID, if they haven't started yet, because I think I talked to them back in November, and now it's like June, and I am a little surprised because, like I said, I know a lot more than is in my book. I could only put 500 pages down, without, breaking the bank, basically.
Oh, yeah, I can tell you this.
More in my head.
Yeah, I have my own TV thing I'm working on, too, and all filming has stopped, all production has stopped, and there was all kinds of, problems with going to insurance companies because we had to stop filming, and we lost this, we lost that. So I know all the big production companies are on hold, basically, and in chaos. Okay, and probably no one there to even take your call.
Yeah, and people have their own families to worry about, so I totally would understand if everything's been put on hold. I do hope they loop me in at some point because I have so much to contribute. And they showed great interest in doing that when I talked to them. They're like, where do you live? Are you nearby? Because we might need you to come on over on short notice. And I'm like, yeah, I'll help as much as I can. So hopefully that'll pick back up. So how do the Kennedys fit into this? Well, the Kennedys were the anomaly as we're moving from, we lost our, we lost our enemy in Germany, but we have a bigger enemy in Russia, and then suddenly we don't have any enemies at all because the Cold War, war is over. Well, the Kennedys fell before that point, obviously. We were still fighting Russia, and the Kennedys were like, why are we fighting Russia? They're not, they were our ally during World War II. They're not the enemy. The enemy right now is poverty and despair and what we're doing abroad and killing people, and countries want to be free, and that's what we should be focusing on. And so Kennedy made the extraordinary move of not being the world's biggest arms dealer like a lot of presidents are, giving arms out to different countries in exchange for favors. No, Kennedy's like, let's give them economic aid. Let's help them build schools and roads and airports, and let's bring them into the modern century. And then, maybe they'll do us a favor, too, because we've been so nice to them. And it was working. And this was a terrible thing for the establishment because although it was working, they weren't profiting as much. And so, Kennedy was a threat to the world order in the sense that the world was based on greed and, dominated by the big moneyed interests. And so he and his brother and Malcolm X and anybody else who wanted to end the Vietnam War, was taken out of the equation because wars are big money for military investors and people who build weapons. There's just incredible money to be made there. And here's the challenge for the globe, that we are facing is like, can we find other things to invest in that don't kill people? Can we find other ways to make big money? And, honestly, Jeff Bezos said, hey, yeah, we can. Let's just make a worldwide marketplace where anybody can sell anything to anybody else. And boom, he's one of the world's richest people. Don't like the guy personally, from what I've read, but, he built an amazing, he had a great idea and really made the most of it. And, we, like I said, this goes back to the labor conversation we were talking earlier. He doesn't pay his workers enough, and but it's something that's not necessarily weaponized. He's not making weapons that are killing people, and that's a step forward. We're showing that there is money in these other areas. Some people are starting to make money in green energy technology. Sadly, we still haven't figured out how to make batteries that store solar power. And when the sun stops shining, there's no more power going into the grid. And that has to change. We have to find a way to, deal with the intermittent issues with that and wind power and all these other alternatives. Geothermal, you would think the heat from the earth never goes away. You'd think there's some possibilities there. But But anyway,
I'd
the
say,
world was
Lisa,
built on war.
If it is true that oil is a finite, that oil doesn't regenerate, and it is a finite, we have a limited amount of oil on the planet. If that is true, right, and 200 years from now,
that is up for debate. That may not be true, but if that is true, go ahead.
If it's true, and we burn it all up, and we need it for plastic and paint and medicine. We need it for a lot of stuff, solvents, And in 200 years, they look back and say, they took it and they burned it.
I know.
Lubricant.
It's funny because one of my passion projects is Nikola Tesla. I have a screenplay on Nikola Tesla, and he's like, why are we burning coal? We could be chemically extracting the energy from coal. And same thing with oil. It's like there are better uses. We're not even getting all the energy out of this stuff that we're burning. We're just burning it, which is like a hugely inefficient process. So I get that. And I read a book not too long ago. I can't remember the name, but it's talking about how he went through every possible alternative energy: carbon fuel, natural gas. What is this? Liquid, whatever the buses in LA run on. It's like liquid
hydrogen,
nitrogen.
Hydrogen.
Hydrogen. Yeah, and he went through all these different technologies, and not one of them will be able to do what gas did. Oil really was a miracle resource for us that enabled so much. And if it runs out and it's gone, he predicted, this author, that there would be like a 10-year gap and we'll have to cobble together multiple forms of energy before we kind of come into a stasis where there's something like hydrogen maybe can take over, hydrogen fuel, but it's still like too far out. And now, of course, with fracking, we're getting oil from deeper and deeper inside the earth and causing earthquakes in the process. There's a direct correlation to areas that are suddenly experiencing swarms of earthquake and areas where they are fracking. I read about earthquakes in Oklahoma, and I had to look it up. It's like, okay, where was the earthquake? Where are they fracking? Yep, right there. You can see it for yourself. You don't even have to listen to the scientists. You can literally Google this information and verify it yourself. But yeah, we're in trouble. And in a way, it's a good trouble to be in because the oil money was the elite establishment.
Right.
The people making the war decisions were the ones who had invested in oil early, knowing the military was going to need it. And so the breakup of the oil, the loss of oil could be the best thing that ever happened to this planet because it's going to redistribute wealth in some amazing way, but we don't know yet where it's going to go because no one technology has risen its head above the others and said, I am the definitive replacement for oil. So that's still to be determined. And like I said, to me, that's not a negative. That's an incredibly hopeful thing. And I love how COVID, this terrible virus that's killing people, but I love how our air is suddenly so much cleaner. I love how not taking boats out in the Venice Canal brings dolphins back. And I hope, wherever possible, I hope a lot of that continues. Because really, it's like we should be spending more time with our loved ones and our family, and we shouldn't be out there, commuting 2 hours each way to work and back. That's just ridiculous when there are jobs that can be done from home. Not every job can. If you're in healthcare, obviously you can't do that from home. But a doctor, can talk to a patient, remotely. They don't necessarily have to see him in person or prod him or touch him. And someday I'm sure we'll have little devices attached to our computer where you put your thumb down and it gets your blood pressure right through the computer. The future is very exciting in some ways, but every advance brings some negative thing with it. Anyway,
new opportunity to rob us blind. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, but my concern right now is there's a real rise in fascism. There's a rise in ugliness. There's a rise in meanness and people feeling free to be overtly nasty. Just on Twitter yesterday, there's a woman in Torrance, not too far from where I live, who's like basically insulting Asian people and telling them to go home. It's like, this is their home. They were born here. Just because they look Asian doesn't mean they're not American. That's crazy. So how did this become possible? And again, by Reagan destroying the fairness doctrine, people getting these warped views on TV, and the elevation of celebrity. And that, kind of brings us to Trump. So the founding fathers of this nation, Trump was like literally what they set up the Electoral College to prevent. They were so worried that a populist would arise who would, get the masses mobilized against their best interests just through the power of his charisma and rhetoric and, his ability to sway crowds. It's what Hitler did in Germany. Now, Trump is not Hitler. He's not nearly as good, quote unquote, at propaganda as Hitler was. What Hitler did with his propaganda was horrific and, killed 6 million Jews in the process. I don't think Trump's going to kill 6 million Jews. And honestly, I think Trump has killed less people on the planet than Hillary would have had she been in office. So don't get me wrong. It's like it's not all black and white. And that's, but this fascism came about because we never said no to it, really. Like I said, we thought we fought it. That's when people thought they were fighting. But in fact, we embraced it. We brought it home. We let it infiltrate every aspect of society and culture. And now we're seeing kind of the end result of that. And, people electing this reality star, and they like it that he's mean. They like it that he's nasty. This is scary to me. This is scary times for America. When people think it's okay to kill others, when you call people traitors, as the right has called, liberals traitors, it's like the next step is you kill traitors, you hang traitors. And so it's like we have to be really careful with the words we use, and we shouldn't throw hate speech around the way we are. Words end up getting people killed, which is why it's illegal to incite to riot. Freedom
Lisa,
of speech is not absolute.
You're aware of the QAnon theory, that they have these indictments and they're going to round people up and take them to military tribunals, and or even some are already arrested and have ankle braces. People are cheering that on. People are cheering that on.
I think QAnon is an intelligence operation. I just don't know if it's from the CIA or again from the KGB. But it's clear that it's an intelligence operation to fragment America, to peel off the gullible and weaponize them and turn them against the good people. And that's a problem because there are good people in America who are trying to help others. And I'm not going to, believe me, I'm not going to call the Democrats good people and the Republicans bad people because it doesn't break down like that. There are good Republicans and there are bad Democrats and vice versa. But, the crazy conspiracy theories like QAnon, they keep people distracted and entertained, and it keeps them from looking at the real conspiracies, like why did they kill Robert Kennedy, and why is Sirhan still in jail for a crime he provably didn't commit? I didn't start my book to try and get Sirhan out of jail, but the more I researched, the angrier I got and the more frustrated I got. And I didn't even want to talk to Munir, his brother, that much until I was nearly done with my book, because one, I didn't want to give them any false hope, and two, I really didn't know if he was innocent or guilty or what until I really got into the research. But as I and I really encourage people to read my book. This isn't about making money. That is not the point. If I wanted to make money, I would have written a book saying Sirhan did it, because I'm sure I could have made a lot of money. The government will love that book. But I didn't do it for the money. I did it to tell the truth. And all these pieces of history are woven together, and the way the police frame Sirhan is the way they are framing black people today. It's the same act. And so I figured if I could completely expose one instance of one person being totally framed, and how the police and the DA and the county officials, how everybody was kind of in on it and kept the lid on it, and how the media, even when they knew, kept the lid on it. If people understand the power that the covert world has over our overt world, only by realizing that and understanding it can we start to dismantle it. And I'm very heartened to hear the cries to defund the police. And at first, that just hearing those two words together kind of terrified me, or three words, because it's like, oh my God, without police, what would we have? But the more you look and the more you read, and of course, my own personal experience, the few times I've needed the police, I haven't really gotten the help that I needed.
Yeah.
And, it's like people think it's more of a safety net than it is in some ways. And defund the police does not mean destroy the police. This is another thing.
And on that note, we're out of time. Lisa Pease. Okay. Thank you so much. Lisa Pease, A Lie Too Big to Fail, The Real History of the Assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. How can people get a hold of you?
It's easiest to find me on Twitter. That's where most people are finding me these days. Try to reach, if I don't respond right away, tweet me again, because maybe I misread.
And it's Lisa, Lisapease, and the book is A Lie Too Big to Fail, The Real History of the Assassination of Robert F. Kennedy. Lisa Pease, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed. You're a great interviewer. I appreciate it.
Good night.